I like this place. I like Union Institute. You stand for something. So whenever I get an invite, I say yes to it. And the culture needs this place. I don't care what the financial reality is. I don't care what the change and blah, blah, blah. The world needs this place. And I like being here because mostly adults participate in this program. Most of higher education is designed for children. It's designed to create dependency. It says that we know and you don't, so pay attention. And this place isn't like that. Now it has some of those attributes, I know. But there's adults come here. And I know when I come in the room, I'll see a sample of the world. And that's important. It's also a place that values ideas. And this is my story about Union, and so don't change my mind about this, okay? I'm not interested in your experience. But it values ideas over resumes. So most higher education now is about resume building. And that's why they can charge so much. And so this place is less concerned in my mind about resumes, even though there's always that pressure, because there's always corporate pressure, corporate wealth, asking the public sector to finance the education of its new employees. And so there's a lot of corporate influence on most higher ed because they don't want to put the labor cost in themselves. They want to outsource the labor cost, have higher ed. You're not giving me the product I'm looking for, even with high school. Most of you in education, we talk about children as if they're products. What kind of product are we producing? We talk about children as if they're tools in international competition. Well, the Asian students are beating us on certain things, so we have STEM programs, science and technology. All right, engineering and math, and that's all that matters. Everything else has been pushed to the side. And so the child then becomes a vehicle or a tool for competition. And we do that. When my child goes to first grade, they stop being interested in learning and they start becoming a performer. And so we turn learners into performers. As soon as you do that, you steal a person's humanity. They become a performer. If you ask most parents, I have grandchildren now, and I ask my daughter, how are the kids doing? And she reports on their performance. Well, they just won a competition. Leland does well in sculling. It tells you that they're well off. Okay, I didn't grow up sculling. I thought sculling was hurting somebody's head. Okay. And so my grandchildren are now performers, and that's what my daughter wants to talk about most of the time, is how their performance is going. And so when you turn somebody into a performer, you've stolen their humanity. You've taken the normal curve and put it on their head like a Napoleonic hat. And so some get A's, some get F's, and that's the way it works. And I was a B student, and I always think if I'd had any integrity, I'd have gone to the failing students and said, thank you. Because you got a D or an F in this class, you made my B much easier to accomplish. If you start working your ass off, I'm in trouble. I may have to show up. I may no longer get by on charm and forced eye contact. That's how I got through school. I got B's and didn't learn anything, and I considered that an accomplishment. And as you can see, I'm still working the same racket. So if that's so, in competition, then this place, in some sense, if it cares about social justice, and it does, it has to create an alternative to that. You say, we don't exist here for competition. We don't exist here we're not worried about competing in the world. In fact, you all are in the world. You are competing, and you won. Now, some of you may think you're here as a career move, but you'll get over that, okay? And so that's a big deal. So I would say the purpose of education is the restoration of our humanity. And that's what the process is about at its best. So that's one of the, and I just think union's a great example of that. You got in early and you still stand for that, even though it's hard to live out. The other thing in this culture is the privatization of everything. So in about 17-something or 16-something, I can't remember, the King of England had to pay some war debts. So he took the public lands and made them private. So citizens could no longer hunt or live or farm on those public lands. That gave rise to Robin Hood. And so since then, increasingly, we want to privatize everything. We think the private sector is the one that knows. We think in this culture, if you're rich, you're right. And so what's lost in that is the common good. So if you say, well, what are we here for? We're here for the restoration of the commons. In this culture, it's called communism. If the President of the United States cares for us all, he's called a socialist. If he saves General Motors, he's called a socialist. To care for the commons in this culture has become a countercultural thing. So you say, what's the point? What are you here for? What's education here for? It's the restoration of the common good. Who will speak for the common good? And so the word community is an expression of that. And we know that if you want to reduce suffering, if the purpose of caring about diversity or caring about social justice or having a deep sense of principles or values that you list, you say, how every place lists that. How do we live them out? We say, well, we care for the common good, care for community. And so everything you do has to have that experience in it, as well as the language of it. So every time we gather, we have to say, well, how do we build community? How do we build the social fabric of people that showed up together? So one thing you do is you get rid of a stage. So all the nuances and details of this. Now, in a consumer society, so I have us here as a third purpose. One is the commons. One is the restoration of our humanity, the rediscovery of my humanity, from being a performance object, from measuring myself by achievement. All right, and so that becomes the work. The other is you say, well, we're a consumer society. And we always haven't been that. But around early of the last century, we discovered we could make more shoes than people needed to wear. And in fact, we discovered that in 14 weeks, we can make enough shoes to put shoes on every citizen of the United States in 14 weeks. And people said, what are we going to do with the other 38 weeks? We have a capacity problem in our factories. And they said, I got an idea. Let's convince people they need more than one pair of shoes. All right, and look where we are now. How many pairs of shoes do we don't? None of us have enough shoes now. We have shoe closets. And so the consumer society has an assertion or an assumption that no matter how much you have, it's not enough. Period. So you say, well, why are rich people greedy? Because they bought the consumer assumption, the consumer belief. Why in 9/11 does the President of the United States tell us, go shopping? Got it? So the assumption is whatever you have is not enough. If you believe that, then it's also true that whoever you are is not enough. And so we have these development projects. Some of them are self-development projects. So I've been the target of development and self-development for 70-some years. And I've noticed that I'm not making great progress because I've been with 3 women in my life, and the feedback I got from all of them have been identically the same. So this covers a 50-year time span, okay? I believe in long-term relationships, just more than one of them, okay? It's absolutely true. So the notion of development has a colonial dimension to it. So you say, what's the purpose of education? The purpose of education is to convince people that what they are is enough, that what you have is enough. And Anu mentioned, so one of the things that is possible here is the idea that our work is to confront young people with their gifts. Right now, we only confront them with their deficiencies. I have only been confronted with my deficiencies. I know when I die, which is getting closer, that I will be dead, and there will be a funeral, and there will be a eulogy. And for the first time in my life, people will talk about my gifts. It's the only institutional, when you retire and when you die is the only time institutionally we talk about people's gifts and capacities. So Frances Strickland is the wife of the ex-governor of Ohio, and she says her goal is to have every 18-year-old in the state of Ohio know what they're good at. So that's what I have Union Institute, that's what I have the schools that you are committing your life to partly being about, is to get off of this colonial project, to convince young people that they're not enough, to make young people afraid of what's ahead. I also notice parenting now has gotten pretty intense. Helicopter parents. My daughter's very intense with her kids. All she wants to talk about is how well they're doing, what classes they should or shouldn't be taking. I have a grandson who chose to take Greek, and they want him to make little cards of some kind to put Greek words on it, and he won't do it. He got his stubbornness somewhere, okay? But if you talk to Leland, he'll talk about ancient Greece for hours. He got every point that class was meant to give him. And at some point he dug in his heels, but it's driving the parents crazy. The Leland, he's such a good student and honors. So the parenting is premised on the notion that there's something wrong with my children and I need to fix it. That no matter how hard they work, they should work harder. And if you're in a school, you feel this all the time. And so part of our work is to create an alternative world to that. So the notion is that in community, one of the tasks of community is to raise a child. And as a citizen, I've outsourced the raising of a child to you. If you're in education, I said, you raise my child. I want you to be responsible for how much they learn. I want you to be responsible for their achievement. I want you to be responsible for the sexuality. I want you to be responsible for the learning about health. I want you to do some character building in that school, would you? I want to make sure there's no drugs, so you can't lock your lockers anymore in Cincinnati, so they can do surprise drug tests. What is this saying about my children? I have 3 shelves at home of books with Kathy and her kids on how to raise a child. What would it be like to be a child and go home and look in the library and see your parents have got 45 books on what the hell to do with me? This is not a confidence builder. How to deal with drug-oriented children, promiscuous children, children who don't, all of this stuff. So this is the mindset, that there's something wrong with my children, and I've asked you to fix them. So community and education is to return to a neighborhood, return to a community, the raising of a child. Because when we grew up, we roamed free, most of us, in the afternoon. I got home at 5:30. My mother every night said, Peter, you got to be home at 5. This is why I remember when I got home, and I'd say, okay. She says, you promise you'll be home tomorrow at 5? I said, okay. And I come home at 5:30. So we had this conversation over about 6 years, every single night. But that afternoon, I was on my own. So these kids are no longer on their own. We're afraid. We can't let them go more than a block from the house is the average. So to me, the part of the job of education is to return and confront the neighborhood, the community, with the raising of a child. And so you start thinking that way. So community to me has a function. It has a job to do. One is to raise our children. What does that mean? That means that those kids need to be known and seen. Okay, there has to be something called a neighborhood. I need my neighbors to know my children's names. And a lot of schools have the language of community building, the language as a lifelong learning center. Mostly what that means is in underutilized times of the day, you allow social service agencies to come in and help fix children. And so most of our notion about raising a child is deficiency-minded. And so if you go over the Rhine here, there's 113 social service agencies, all trying to fix the deficiencies of Cincinnati. Most of the conversation about Cincinnati is one of deficiencies. What's wrong with us? If you read the newspaper, if you read the evening news, it's all about what's wrong with us. Who got killed last night? Who died? Who was robbed? This is what we call news. So the public narrative is that there's something wrong with us, fear-based narrative. And you're living with that. If you're in education, you're trying to deal with the consequences. So you might say that part of Union Institute, part of your work in education is to reconstruct that, is to confront people, each other, youth, with their gifts, with what they're good at, with their capacities, to have a conversation of possibilities. So part of the work in community is to talk about what's possible here rather than what's wrong here. Part of the culture of an institute should be to talk about what's working here instead of what's not working here. And as students here and faculty, you're up against that all the time. And so to me, that's one of the jobs of community. Another job of community is to assure the safety. Police can't keep us safe. There's no relationship between arrests and safety. There's none. Now, we need the police. God bless them. I'm glad somebody will do that job, because certain things are frightening. But the idea, so you say, well, another function of community, what are we teaching? If we care about social justice, if we care about a safe place, if we care about the raising of a child, if we care about health, these are social justice issues. Social justice isn't about crime, it's about economics. It's about health, it's about a child. And you say, well, then I need community to do that. I can't give it over to the professionals. I can't count on the health professionals to keep me healthy. In fact, they don't. 15% of my health is in the hands of the professionals. 85% is in my hands. Either my genetics, my social world. If I have social connectedness, I'll live a year or two longer than if I live an isolated life. If I want to change my behavior in my corrupt relationship with sugar, alcohol, stress, some of my favorite, my best friends, okay? You say, I can't do that on my own. You know? Now, I personally turn over my health to my doctor. And so when Dottie, when I have a physical actually Friday, I know with the conversation, she says, how you doing? I'm saying, great. I think you got to find out if something's wrong with me. I'm not going to help you in this venture, because I want to hold her personally accountable for my well-being. So she says, how you doing with aging? I'm doing really good with aging, Dottie. How, you have any problem with typical older men? No, I can urinate across a football field, Dottie. Don't lay this stuff on me. This is your job to find out. So if you care about social justice and all these values, you have to confront this. You say that health is a social phenomenon. I need a support group if I'm going to change my health habits. A friend of mine is a thoracic surgeon, and he says that if his patients, who he doesn't want back, don't find a support group beyond the one the hospital provides, he says they're coming back. 99% are coming back. And the ones who get healthy are ones who run support groups of people who have heart surgery. And so whether it's health, whether it's changing my behavior, my relationship to food, changing my relationship to consumption, to be poor in this culture is to have a lousy relationship with money. It's not the absence of money. Because most poor people in this country have cell phones, they have sneakers, they have TVs. It's just they're out of harmony. Now, there is a huge disproportion of wealth distribution here. That's a given. But you say, what can I do to help poor people? Well, you have to create a sense of support so they can rejoin us, so we welcome them back in. Most people who go to food kitchens, you know what their number one skill, if you start asking people what you're good at, people that go to food kitchens, their number one skill is cooking. And I just find that stunning. That here, we're feeding them instead of having them use the one thing they're best at in the world. So this becomes the shift in thinking. You say, how do I create a circle of support, a small group, no matter what your concern is? If I care about homecomers, okay, people coming out of prison, how do I, right now it's what, 60, 70, 80% go back to prison. Well, the reason is not because they like prison. The reason is they have no circle of support. They have nothing to come into. So if I care, no matter what the issue is, whether it's health, whether it's people on the margin, whether it's disabled, people with mental illness, there's a Phoenix House here who looks at the gifts of the mentally ill. And they walk in and say, what do you know how to do? What are you good at? And a lot of them are very good at listening. A lot of them are very good at paying attention. And so they say, okay, then you have a job to do. You're going to be a listener for the day. And if you're with these people, they know how to listen. Especially, I notice it because I know how to talk. And so in Phoenix Place, their hospitalization, their alcoholism, all those symptoms go way down because they found some way to be useful with their gifts. So it doesn't matter what the issue is, whether it's health, whether it's an economy. You say, how do we create an alternative economy? Right now our measures of economy are not going to get better because we still think Toyota should come to town. We still think big businesses. And so you say, well, every neighborhood has a local economy. Every housing project has an internal economy. And so you say, well, how do we help people join this economy? So community and these social justice, they're very closely together, which means that every time you gather people, they have to be connected to each other. And in a consumer economy, in a economy based on privatization, because I've not only privatized all the functions, including toll roads, including prisons, including government, I've always also privatized my life. I now go in my house and shut the door, face backwards. So there's a movement called pocket neighborhoods, where they're starting to build houses with porches facing each other around a common space by design, or redoing urban centers. And so so all kinds of things start to happen. People eat better, their children are known, the children are watched, the people feel safer. They still can be private, or they can be public. So this becomes social movements. If you care about social justice, you start caring about architecture. You start caring about neighborhoods. You start caring about getting people connected. If you care about learning, all right, you have to care about students' relationship to each other. All learning is social. Now in the high performance world, in Walnut Hills, one of the schools in this town that has the big endowment, high performance, 55 presidents of something graduated from there. They care about content. They pride themselves on advanced placement, on sophisticated, they don't care about connectedness. So which means they care more about teaching than learning. So if you care about learning, if education degree means you care about learning, then you say, well, the social connectedness of people in a classroom has everything to do with learning. And then every time we get together, we have to remember that. So those are some thoughts. The notion of development, I've lost interest in it. I know international development has not been successful. I know all the other countries that we've tried to develop have been forms of colonialism, that we create indebtedness to them to us, and we extract resources in the same process. So we know that's colonialism. I'm feeling the same way about individual development. All of us are taking tests. I've taken the Myers-Briggs test. I'm an INFJ. I forgot what it means, but I'm proud of it, okay? And I know I need to develop my E, whatever the rest of them are. My P qualities, my E qualities, I should be more of an extrovert. We now have positive psychology, right? So now I can find out what my strengths are so I can work on them. Got it? So no matter the most loving, still becomes a project. I'm still a work in progress. And so part of the shift in thinking that you can play with is to say, well, why don't we confront people with their gifts? Why don't we cease the conversation about what's wrong with you? When somebody writes a paper, why don't we talk about what they got right? How about if we use green pencil instead of red pencil, if you want to really be communistic? None of this is an argument against capitalism. All capitalism means is private ownership. Nothing wrong with that, is that whole argument. So that, to me, it becomes the work. And you say, who will care for the commons? We will. What's the purpose of education? Is to give a sense of the common good. Suppose we had classrooms where everybody had to be successful. Suppose I couldn't get my B if other people were failing in that classroom. What would that, and people have tried that. And it's terrifying. A lot of these ideas on empowerment, people try it out and they call me and tell me how hard it is. But then you start thinking that way. It also concretizes this notion of social justice. It says that feeling isn't enough. Feeling compassionate, it's wonderful, but not enough. So that becomes the work. The gift-mindedness. So here in Cincinnati, there's a place called Elements. If you're here, you should come down sometime. If you really want to have fun on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday night, go to Elements and watch them rehearse dance and music. It's stunning. So at that place, we're only interested in what these kids are good at. They're all urban center kids. They come in, we don't care about what's going on at home. We don't ask them about high school. What their record is. We want to know, what do you love to do? Well, they love hip hop. They love music. They love dance. And so we teach them. I don't teach them. But they learn how to dance there. And they're good at it. They learn how to make records. They learn how to lay down beats. So instead of, most agencies would say, what's wrong with you? Most social service for youth in this city want you to straighten your hat. They want you to pull up your pants. They don't want you to wear long sleeve white shirts with no collar. And they're trying to get you ready for the workplace, all right? And so all of these are still deficiency, so maybe that is the work. So gift-minded. The other principle, and then we'll do something, is the idea of the stranger. So part of the purpose of this institute is the welcoming of the stranger. It's called hospitality. Well, in this modern culture, we've gone towards like-mindedness. So Cincinnati is resegregated. A friend of mine, Damon, says, why don't we just make segregation work? So he's a Baptist minister friend. I think you're probably right. So the blacks, have their, depends on your economic level, you're in different black neighborhoods, farther and farther from the city. And so every time I go shopping, they're interested in like-mindedness, what other people like me are buying. Got it? And what bothers me is they're usually right. I say, oh, they're buying that, I'll buy that book. So the work in building community is to bring hospitality into the world. So every time you gather people, you're bringing strangers together. And that's a big deal. It's a big deal in schools. Our kids, like current ones, attended the most integrated school in Cincinnati, Clark Montessori High School. Lunchtime, you'd never know it. Okay, and so there's all this separating energy. White kids play soccer, blacks play basketball and football, white kids do golf. And so that, to me, is the work. That what this institute stands for is the welcoming of the stranger, the welcoming of the other, and so that becomes the So those are some thoughts. I don't know if I've missed anything. The other thought, there's always one more, and I'll stop and we'll do something, is the notion of reform. So at some level, this culture knows that things aren't going well. So we have government reform, we have education reform, we have health care reform, we have financial reform. So I have no faith that any of these reform movements will change anything. And the reason is, one reason is they're all done with this business perspective. And the business perspective is that speed matters, that cost matters, that measurability matters. It's kind of stunning. He shows up with a tape measure, you know, as a welcome. Hi, I'm new. Let me give you a symbol to remember me by. It's as if measurement is the point. Got it? And so this is the culture. This is the culture. Speed, all right, cost, efficiency. I know that my health will not improve if the healthcare system becomes lower cost and more efficient. I know that unless I go to Dottie Schaefer and say, Dottie, you got to help me find a group to be part of so I can change my relationship with food and stress and alcohol and exercise. Until I decide to do that, Dottie's nothing but pills. Now, God bless her for her pills. I appreciate that. I personally believe in better living through chemistry. I do. And some of them do help, because I do have some symptoms of aging. Right? But until I change my relationship to food, my relationship to Dottie, my relationship to exercise. So part of the dominant culture believes in restless productivity. The belief that no matter how much you do is not enough is what's making us sick. And these tools, these instruments that we turn off, I've been asking people to take their cell phone and park it at the table, and 40% of people won't do it. Won't do it. So that's the work. To me, that is to change my relationship with health. And so the reform efforts for better cost, speed, and efficiency are useless. All they'll do is save money. You see that in schools now. We're assaulting teachers. It blows my mind. We're accusing teachers in the state of Wisconsin and Ohio of being overpaid. I mean, I can't believe that. Teachers are overpaid. And then we accuse them, we've got to weed out the bad ones. So this is what reform does. It takes that measuring rod and acts as if it counts for everything. And so what you're up to is to create some kind of transformation, some kind of shift in thinking, other than using the business perspective. There's nothing wrong with the business perspective, but it's just that. It's just a business perspective, where you have a social perspective, you have a relational perspective. So instead of speed, you stand for depth. This is what I love about this place. You stand for thought. Most people don't have time to think. If you do workshops with people, they say, how was it? It was great, I had a chance to think. And I think, well, what are you doing with the rest of your life? Well, I'm busy. I'm doing things. I'm a human doing. All right? And so this becomes the effort, is to say slow. Nature works at 2 speeds, medium and slow. It becomes relational. In the business world, relationships are instrumental. Quid pro quo, barter. What can we? So in the social world, the communal world, relationships are the point. If you care about learning, relationships have everything to do with learning. And so that's the thought. So what I'd like to do is break you into small groups. Have I got time? Oh, we have weeks. I'm not going to keep talking until 2:30. In fact, we're going to be done before 2:30. This is too much punishment. So what I'd like to do is just to change the room. So you say, well, how does the world get transformed? Well, one room at a time. And you say, well, that's awfully slow. And I say, I know it's slow. I just don't know how to be in 2 rooms at the same time. So part of the business perspective is if you can't take it to scale, it's not worth doing. If it's not replicable, it's not worth doing. These child have to be product. We have a core curriculum coming around. We have core things in education. The industrialization of education is just about complete. It may be over. And so you say, well, at least we can do when we come together is to create an alternative to that. And say we came here to connect with each other. We came here to find each other. So the small group becomes the way of doing that. So every time you're in a room, you got to work with the room. You get rid of you don't need a podium. You don't need a stage. We don't need PowerPoint. All PowerPoint does is says that power is the point. It's not that complicated. It's not that complicated. All PowerPoint means is that I had to figure out ahead of time how I wanted to be with you. So much for spontaneity, so much for showing up, so much for surprise. So the business perspective values predictability. You run classes and say, what are they going to walk out with? Show me the 5 things they're going to learn as a result of being here, and how are you going to measure against those 5 things? As if the human being was predictable. That's the industrialization of a soul. What it really is, in the name of efficiency, in the name of predictability. So part of what you stand for is the existence of mystery. Mystery doesn't mean we don't know anything. It means some things are unknowable. And it may be that everything that matters. This is why we need the faith community in the conversation. Well, you can't separate religion and philosophy from economics. And so what you'll invent here is a compassionate economics of happiness. Thank you. It always feels like the next room is having a better time, doesn't it? So the last thought, the faith community has a language we can use. It has a values mystery. It values what's unknowable. It has a different relationship with time. I'm biding my time. I'm taking time. Time on my hands. In the Pharaoh community, in the predatory economy, we have no time. In the predatory dominant economy, everything has to be predictable. Everything has to be taken to scale, which means nothing is unique. So this place creates an alternative to that. The leadership learning here, social justice here, says time, unknowability, surprise are our values. They're an antidote to predictability. There's no alive, and so that's the thought. So what I'd like to do is break you into groups of 3. So most forms of gathering are organized around certain protocols. Classes still get lined up in places. Places still have auditoriums, all right? And all that means is somebody knows, and somebody's there to be passive, somebody's there to be active. That's what an auditorium does. It lines people up like sardines. In an auditorium, as a social structure, every citizen that came into the room turns their backs on each other. And so I end up giving talks on empowerment, relationships, community, and everybody in the room's got their back to each other. Got it? And so part of what you're teaching is to design experiences that embody the thing you're talking about. So we have to break into small groups. Some of you hate small groups. This too shall pass. Now there's some protocols that are plebeian protocols. There's a wonderful book called The Ignorant Perfection of Ordinary People by a guy named Robert Inchausti. And so the business protocols, you know, Robert's Rules of Order, PowerPoint, predictable, so the alternative are plebeian protocols. Find 2 other people. Second, find people that you know the least. So every time we come into a room, I'm looking for the stranger. Why? Because I can't learn from people that I know. Why? Because they think they know me. So everybody that thinks they know me is not good learning for me. And if you go away for a week and then you go home, the first thing you hear when you walk in the door is, don't try any of that crap on me. I'm not that happy with you, but I love your predictability. All right, I'd rather experience a known misery than. So you're always asking, find 2 people that you know the least. Sit so you can see each other and have a conversation. Now, what the conversation? The other thing about community building is questions bring people together. Answers keep them apart. And so if you take community building and social justice seriously, you return into the hands of citizens what we thought the police, the doctor, the teacher were going to do for us. So when we hold safety meetings in this neighborhood, when I was involved, the police would be there, but they weren't there to teach citizens how to be safe. We broke people into small groups and said, what can you do to get connected to each other, to create a safer space in this neighborhood. And please come join us. Please sit down with us. So why don't we do that? Fine, let's do just 10 minutes. A threesome. You know, one of my favorite questions, one question is any of this making any sense to you? But a bigger question is, you came here for a reason, right? So why don't you share with each other, what are you doing here? Why was it important for you to show up today to this particular luncheon? Let's do this now for 10 minutes.